Pokeweed is without a doubt one of the most amazing and nutritious vegetables that most people have never tried. And that's a huge shame. I mean, you don't even have to grow it. They pop up all over in common areas across the globe. And even if you have eaten them before, I'd be willing to bet that you were eating the leaves and not the part that I'm going to show you today. Poke should never be consumed raw, and I'm going to show you exactly what I do to prepare it properly. For most of my time as a forager, I have eaten the boiled greens of pokeweed. I'll be honest with you all, I didn't like it that much. I felt like I was trying to convince myself that it was good, and in my area of North Alabama, it's been difficult to remove an acrid reaction even when gathered at the right stage and prepared correctly. But every single one of those drawbacks is irrelevant with the shoots of pokeweed. You have never had a juicier vegetable in your life, even with just parboiling them once. They had zero acridness and they were just so delicious. But there are a few things that you need to know about eating poke shoots. You still have to gather them at the right stage, and it may not be what you think. I'll also show you where to look for them because they're better in some locations than others. I'll show you how to prepare them because it is quite different to preparing the leaves, and I will address some of the controversy and alleged danger around eating this plant. Plus, there is at least one lookalike that I want to show you, and I have a recipe that makes them absolutely mouth-watering.
Pokeweed, Phytolacca americana, is an aggressively growing and widespread native plant in North America. You may know it more by its deep purple berries that emerge later in the year. But in the spring, it shoots up from its massive taproot with a vigorous shoot that produces large, simple, alternating leaves with smooth edges. When the leaves are young, they are slightly furrowed at the edges and are more upwards pointing. Do note that everything I'm showing you today likely applies to other members of the genus Phytolacca as well. The first thing that you need to understand with poke consumption is that it should never be eaten raw. It needs to be cooked in a particular way before you can eat it. You'll hear various methods of doing this, but generally it involves boiling the plant parts in ample amount of water and then changing the water 1 to several times for subsequent boils. There is this one case where they were allegedly cooked properly, but it still resulted in people getting sick from them, or at least that was the claim. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. I know this whole toxic if not prepared correctly may be putting off some people, but consider that there are many common foods that are toxic if not prepared right. Kidney beans must be cooked to break down the lectins in boiling water. Raw chicken has to be cooked to a particular temperature to kill bacterial pathogens. Cassava has to be processed to remove cyanogenic glycosides. And in the case of food that you and I get from the grocery store, you aren't the one that has to worry about gathering them and processing them. That is all done for you. But with wild pokeweed, we have to do everything ourselves. So along with preparation, poke must be gathered at the right stage in order to be safe to eat. What exactly the right stage is the first major point of confusion around this plant. You are going to see all kinds of recommendations that are based on some kind of strict height requirement. Kind of like a, you must be this tall to ride, but rather, must be this short to eat. So people will say, never gather it if it's over 1 foot tall, 8 inches tall, 6 inches, etc., etc. You can go ahead and disregard any advice that's like this. In fact, I usually only gather it after it's above 1 foot tall. A far better measurement of the proper harvest stage is described by Sam Thayer in his book, which tells us to look for a tender, meristematic growth. This feature often correlates to height, but it's not directly related. So what is tender meristematic growth? What does that mean? This is when the plant will be growing vigorously. I use 2 main indicators for this. Remember the wavy edged leaves that we saw at the beginning? That is the first one. Second is a stem that is tender and flexible. You can see here where I go to bend it, it easily reaches all the way to the ground without snapping. An additional feature to pay some amount of attention to is that we would like to find stems that are not a deep magenta, as this is often correlated with the levels of toxic chemicals present. This is where those don't harvest if above rules really break down. When the shoots of poke are extremely young, especially if they're growing in an area with a lot of sun, they will often be a deep magenta. This is not a good time to harvest them. I mean, just look, the tip of the shoot is basically right next to the root where the highest concentration of the toxins lies. We would actually need to wait for these to become more mature before gathering them. And believe me, I've gathered poke that are even taller than me, and I'm like 6'4", right? To me, the best measure is simply the tenderness of the stems. I found poke plants that are somewhat magenta, but still perfectly tender, and I personally harvest and eat these all the time without issue. You'll see in a second that we're going to remove the outside portion of the stems anyway. I've also found some that are overall green but have grown stiff. Those would not be good. Color is really just an indicator, but tenderness, that is the true metric. Even here, look at how large the stem is, but it is still nice and tender. However, just because one part of the plant is tender doesn't mean that you can gather all parts. With this one, the top part is tender, but the base is becoming more rigid. So I would just gather the top flexible part. Trust your hands and your fingers. They will tell you what you want to get. In my experience, good places to look for pokeweed shoots are areas with rich soil and mixed shade. Here, the plants grow vigorously, producing the largest, juiciest vegetable stems. Keep in mind that poke is an herbaceous perennial, so they'll come back in the same locations every year, and older plants with larger taproots tend to produce the largest shoots. In addition, even if you harvest the main stem, poke has no issue with sending up another stalk. It won't tend to kill the plant. In terms of gathering the shoots for food, a good general rule of thumb to follow is that once the plant has started flowering, your window for gathering it has ended. Of course, this exact timing is going to vary by location and year, but with my interactive Forager's calendar, you can get a really solid idea of when the shoots will emerge, as well as when the plant will start to flower and fruit for pokeweed and dozens of other wild species as well. Those flowers are eventually going to turn into the iconic dark purple berries that everyone knows about. It is important to note that while you will find some mentions of medicinal kind of uses for the berries consumed in a particular way, there are few mentions, or at least there are no mentions in my research, of the berries being consumed as a food. And as we're going to learn in a second, most of the cases of poke toxicity in adults comes with people being a bit ambitious with the medicinal uses of the plant, not one to experiment with. And also, the berries, they taste awful, so why bother? In terms of lookalikes of pokeweed, really it would be quite difficult to misidentify for something else, but in theory you could mistake it for the shoots of Japanese knotweed, which is another edible plant. Knotweed leaves are much wider and they are much flatter at the base. Plus, there is a ring that encircles the stem where the leaves attach on knotweed, which pokeweed lacks. As knotweed matures, the stems will be much more splotchy, but pokeweed will be a more solid color. And that's it for distinguishing them. It's very, very easy. If you were to mess around with pokeweed and eat it raw or improperly prepared, you can expect symptoms to include severe gastrointestinal distress, along with a burning sensation in the throat, in the stomach, headache, dizziness, muscle weakness, and tremors in more severe cases. Most of those toxicity cases that we looked at before involve people doing very dumb things like trying to have pokeweed tea for constipation, or being way too bold with medicinal uses involving the root or the berries. Even then, the patients all typically make a full recovery. Pokeweed is sometimes called a deadly plant, and personally, I think that is absolutely ridiculous. Just because a plant is toxic doesn't mean that it's deadly. To me, a deadly plant is one where you could reasonably consume a lethal dose on accident, like poison hemlock or foxglove. Baseless articles like this one by Ohio State University will make big claims about the dangers of consuming poke, like infants dying from eating a few raw berries, or adults having fatal poisonings by preparing them improperly, but if you look in their article, they don't have any sources to back this up whatsoever. OSU, show me your sources. In a report aggregating pokeweed poisoning cases in the state of Kentucky, over the course of a decade there were 1,669 instances. The vast majority of these were children who ate the berries, and in every single case there were exactly 0 deaths. 0. To me, pokeweed does not get anywhere close to qualifying as a deadly plant, and to call it one really diminishes the true deadly plants that are out there. Before we get to cooking, I do want to address a particular toxicology case that people bring up all the time to claim that poke can be poisonous even if gathered and prepared properly. Let's look at this a little bit closer. The case comes from an event that happened on July 11th of 1980. If that July date didn't ring alarm bells for you, it should, and I'll show you why in a moment. Anyways, this happened at like a nature camp or something like that in New Jersey, and 21 of 52 campers were admitted to the hospital for the usual cluster of symptoms that are associated with poke toxicity. And allegedly, every one of them was prepared correctly as one should. So what happened? Well, the first thing is that we can't know for sure. This happened back in 1980, but let's think through this a little bit. Remember that date, July 11th? Yeah, that is really, really late for gathering pokeweed greens in New Jersey. For reference, here are some iNaturalist observations in the same area at that date. Look at how old these plants are. The flowers and berries are already quite developed. Personally, I would never gather the greens at this stage. So already, they are way past good collection time. And if that was the case, I don't know that I would trust the account of the camp counselors who prepared and served the pokeweed. I can only imagine as everyone started to get sick, they're like, oh shoot, did we do this right? Well, yeah, we boiled them. You're just supposed to boil them. I think so, but... And then they panic and they look it up and they're like, oh shoot, we knew what we were doing. We did everything right. Everyone does this all the time and it's no problem. Yeah, I don't know about all of that. People very often lie in cases like this. I'd be willing to bet they were doing everything that they could to avoid a major lawsuit. So don't forget what I'm about to tell you here. Pokeweed and all of its similar relatives are consumed around the globe and have been done so for thousands and thousands of years without issue. Some of the other ones that I want to highlight are Phytolacca octandra in Central America and Phytolacca acinosa in Nepal and East Asia. By the way, a synonym for Phytolacca acinosa is Phytolacca esculenta. Esculenta means food or delicious, so there is a lot of historical context around these being eaten. Also, in the traditional context, the shoots eaten as a vegetable were mentioned far more often than the leaves were as a boiled green. So, how do we prepare the shoots? Once you've gathered your poke, they will of course have the leaves attached. On the younger stems, if you carefully remove the leaves, it will strip off the outer skin with it, which may have a greater concentration of the toxin, so this is not a step to skip. The leaves from the stems, I just generally use them for compost, honestly. For larger stems, you can also peel strips from the base in order to remove larger pieces of the outer skin and just be left with a tender inner shoot. Once again, I need to emphasize this. They should be tender and flexible. You can see right here how much these ones are that I've gathered. They're flopping around everywhere. After peeling, I usually cut them into little medallions, and then I bring a pot of salted water to a boil. And also, just look at how cool they look when cut lengthwise. Poke is a truly beautiful plant. After dropping all the medallions into the water, I'll leave them for about 5 to 7 minutes and then strain everything out. At this point, I recommend that you taste one of them. They should be tender, without any bitterness, and not produce any burning or acrid sensation in the mouth. Make sure that you let them cool enough so you aren't fooled by the heat. With the shoots, they really shouldn't have any of that effect. But if they do, try another change to the boiling water. If that second change doesn't get rid of it, I just wouldn't use those shoots at all. If they didn't produce any of those though, you are ready for the next step and you have a lot of options. Poke can be used for all kinds of things. To me, anywhere that you would use large asparagus spears or vegetables like okra, you can use poke shoots. My favorite way to bring out even more of the flavor from them is to heat up a pan with bacon fat and crisp up each of the sides until it's developed a nice color. These honestly can be eaten completely on their own. They are so good. And when you try this out, let us all know what you use this for in the pinned comment. So with pokeweed, as we've learned, the toxicity is relatively overblown or overstated. But with this wild food, it's actually a little bit understated. That's right. Did you know that white clover can actually contain cyanide? In this video right here, I'm going to tell you all about it, how to have a good idea of if it's there or not, and amazing uses for the plant that you might not have heard about before. So I hope to see you there.